Welcome to the Deeper 2025 podcast. I'm so excited that you've joined us today. Today we're looking at 2 Corinthians chapter 4. I want to read for us verses 7 through 9. Now, we have this treasure in clay jars so that this extraordinary power may be from God and not from us. We're afflicted in every way but not crushed. We're perplexed but not in despair. We are persecuted but not abandoned. We are struck down but not destroyed. I love the picture that Paul paints here. It's kind of a high definition picture, if you will, that there are these clay jars. And if you think about clay jars, especially in this time when Paul was writing, clay jars were fragile. But here in these verses in 2 Corinthians 4, Paul talks about the fact that these clay jars, which are our lives, they are holding something that's priceless. And they're holding the gospel. They're holding the good news of the story of Jesus and what he's done for us. And he says here, we're afflicted in every way but not crushed. We're perplexed but not in despair. We're persecuted, not abandoned. Struck down but not destroyed. And really what Paul is saying there is these fragile bodies that we live in, these weak, limited, pressure-filled lives that we live, hold something that's so priceless. The gospel of Jesus is what we hold. But God has chosen us, these clay jars, these fragile clay jars, these fragile instruments. He's chosen us as people to hold the priceless truth of the gospel. And I love that. That is one of my favorite things to think through, that God would use imperfect, fragile people to just spread the message of the gospel everywhere. It's not about being perfect. It's not about being strong. And so the first thing I would tell you today is embrace your weakness. You're like, BJ, I haven't heard that before. I've only heard to play to your strengths. But the gospel and God's economy are way different. And he says that we should embrace our weakness. We should not hide our struggles. You know, a lot of times I think about social media, and social media has taken our world by storm the last 10 or 15 years. And in social media, if you think about it, with all the filters and everything else that social media offers, we kind of tend to only put our highlights. I very rarely see people saying, man, I'm sure struggling right now. It's only the highlights. But God says, no, I don't want you to hide your struggles. I want you to embrace your struggles, and I want you to embrace your weakness. Why? Because I work through weakness better than I work through your strength. And I think that's important for us to remember, that God wants to work through your weakness more than he wants to work through your strength. Why? I believe because God wants to get the glory. He doesn't want us to get the glory. And, I'm not sure about you, but for me, sometimes I can tend to be a glory hog. I can tend to almost break my arm because I'm patting myself on the back when something goes well. But here's the thing. If God works in my weakness, I can't do that, because I know it's my weakness and it's only God that's working through that. And so when we embrace our weakness, we then have to trust that God's strength is going to be the thing that pulls us through. When we feel like we're fragile and we're pressed and we're perplexed and not in despair, but we're persecuted, we have to remember that we're not abandoned. When we're struck down, we have to remember that we're not destroyed. God's strength will uphold us. His power is strong enough to uphold even the weakest and the most fragile clay jars that hold this priceless truth of the gospel. We also have to keep an eternal perspective. It's so easy for us to get short-sighted and think about the here and now. Think about this life that we're living in and miss the fact that there is an eternity that awaits us. And if you'll keep an eternal perspective, listen, I'm not talking about putting your head in the clouds and not being useful in this world. I'm talking about the fact that when we have a perspective that's eternal, when we have a perspective that thinks about the eternity to come, it changes the way that we live. And the last thing I would say is we've got to share the treasure that we've been entrusted with. He says here in verse 7, we have this treasure in clay jars. The gospel that we have, the good news of Jesus that we have, is a treasure that is not meant for us to be to hold it in and keep it in. It's a treasure that we are meant to share. And here's the good news. The brokenness that you've experienced, the brokenness that your life entails, gives you the platform to share the gospel. Think about this. If you were perfect, if you were strong in your own way, if you were good enough to do it on your own, then what you would have to tell someone is, hey, if you're just good like me, if you're just good enough like me, if you just do enough like I've done enough, then you can have this treasure too. But the fact that we say, hey, we're fragile, we're perplexed, we're persecuted, we're struck down, we're afflicted in every way. And when you say that, and then you say, but I have met Jesus, and in his strength I am strong, even though I am weak, that's something that anybody can hold on to. So we don't take this treasure and store it up and bury it and put it in a place where nobody can see it. We share this treasure because the good news is good news for everybody. I heard this a long time ago. The good news is good news only if it gets there in time. And there are people in your life that need to hear the good news of Jesus today. They need to hear about the treasure that you are holding in your life today, because the good news is only good news if it gets there in time. So remember, yes, you're weak. Yes, you're fragile. Yes, you're afflicted in every way. Yes, you're perplexed. Yes, you're persecuted. Yes, you're struck down. But God's strength is going to make sure that even though you're afflicted, you're not crushed. Even though you're perplexed, you're not in despair. Even though you're persecuted, you're not abandoned. And even though you're struck down, you're not destroyed. Live in God's strength today and be blessed.